tō e whenga maariro ni ke kamata tau po talama ko ia I he pongpongkoini. Good morning everyone and warm Pacific greetings to everyone here. I'd just like to ask to shelter under the acknowledgement which has been said in this very sacred place and then take the opportunity to start off our Talanoa this morning. And before we progress into our Talanoa as we do in our in the Pacific and from our forefathers and grandfathers and our ancestors, we always acknowledge our Father and God in heaven and then ask Him to guide us in this beautiful day that we all gather here before we proceed with our Talanoa. So with that, I'd like to invite Pastor Sua to come and lead us with the opening prayer, and then after that, we'll talk to us about some housekeeping rules. I think part of the policies and things as we do in this country, we have to comply with those stuff. And then after that, we'll get on to our Talanoa. But I'd like to invite Pastor Sua to lead us. Mano.
Lona ia le pa ia malu a fia tainane ma ASS ma ro so fu mau ma lan ma ia le ka ko ale anga fulua ma to le nei wo fia mi te ale anga wa toa tino masina a to fo la no le no o le aso le nei wa fai yofa sa to te oli ma fia iai turo oro mai akarongo mai Kia ora koutou katoa. Whakalowolai atu and Nisam Burminaka. And welcome once again. And as the Reverend Dr. Sione has said, we give thanks to God for all that He has done and for all that we are about to hear. So let us honor God and give thanks. Lord, we thank you for this opportunity that we have been given today to hear and to talk together, to learn, Lord, things that can be of benefit to our people. We thank you for the great research that has been done, and we pray that as we learn and as we hear from all of the findings and all of the studies, that we are able to help our elderly and help be a blessing within our community. We thank you once again, and we pray your blessing upon this day. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Amen. So just some housekeeping rules before we do move on. In case of an emergency, the evacuation is through the exits, and our gathering point is just here outside to my right, and also if you do need to use the restrooms, they are just through the doors right there. But please be interactive today, get to know different people, and this is an opportunity for us to share. So thank you very much, and blessings over there.
Malopito, Pastor Sua, thank you for leading us with our opening prayer and acknowledging our Father in heaven to lead us today in our Talanoa. And it's quite exciting that we have this opportunity to come today, and not only that, but to start the relationship with Messi University, with Dr. Hospice around today. So our Talanoa, we've got a really outstanding, a lot of outstanding speakers and some concepts and ideas that we'll be talking about today. But before that, I'll tell you a little bit about myself and the role that I'll be doing. My name is Sione Vaka. I'm currently working at the Auckland University of Technology. I was with Messi University with Associate Professor Siautu, and Professor Fiona, and they had enough of me and they kicked me out. but fortunately, I've got another job with AUT, so I'm with them now. But they were still really kind to give me this project. So I'm very happy to be in this project with them as well. And it's quite, and you hear from them today how they talk about the project that we're having. And I think one of the great thing about today, because sometimes when we work in university, we do a lot of research and we don't come and talk to people in our community. So we work in isolation there and our people are here. Not only that, some of the things that we do, we go and do research and then we don't usually go and tell the people what are the findings and what are the important, significant things that we find from there. But this time, with the leadership of Professor Alders and Associate Professor Mafileo and Alfaio Tungia, it's really good that they had the opportunity to come and start talking to our people, and also with the support from our Reverend Fotu and Selina with their church, and talk about the progress of these findings around there. And it's quite important as well that we have Totara Hospice with their team sort of coming together in these collaborations and things as well. So our session will start off with the first one. We hear from our group from Messi, and also from Reverend Fotu and Selina about their experiences, and then we'll open up the floor for some Talanoa, and then after that we'll have some a bit of a break and have some light morning tea. I think it's coming along the way, and then after that we'll come back and hear from our hospice team as well. And then we're very lucky we have a hospice team, and not only that, but we have people who are experienced in palliative care. We have our nurse here, Margaret, who I'll talk more about that as we come to that session. But before, without any further ado, I think we should continue to our next panel, and I'd like to invite our panel, if they could come here to the front. We have I'll invite Tracy and Siautu to come first, because they'll talk, and then after that I'll bring Fiona and yeah. Oh, yeah, I'll invite Tracy and Fiona. It's always like that in our Pacific stuff. You give some good structure, and then after that you change. So I'll give the opportunity to them to.
My name is Tracy Mafileo, and it's my honour to introduce our study this morning. So I'm based in Palmerston North. I work at the School of Social Work and within the College of Health at Massey University. Flew up this morning, and I just want to acknowledge Pastor Soa. I think he's already left for the day, but for his opening. But also to Totara Hospice New Guinea and the team here for the beautiful space that we get to come and meet and talk about these sacred things, about our elders and our care for our elders within our families. We have quite a multidisciplinary team, as our leader, Associate Professor Siautu Alefaya, brought us together. She's a psychologist. I come from social work, and Dr. Sione Vaka is a nursing academic and lecturer. So this study that we've come together to work on is funded by the Health Research Council of New Zealand, and we've called it Caring for Our Pacific Wisdom Bearers study. And this morning I decided to put up a photo there. So this is my late father. He passed in 2017. His name is Munudao, or Joe Mafileo. And these are my two boys. They're now 8 and 10. But this is, I think, quite a precious photo, and I love coming back to this photo because it says something about the wisdom that our Pacific elders pass on, the value that they have within our families. My father migrated to Aotearoa, New Zealand in the late 1960s when there was a big wave of Pacific migrants. So in our Pacific nations, traditionally, there was intergenerational kinship care and multi-generational living. Then migration to Aotearoa, New Zealand, there is change. But one of the values that I know was passed on, and what is being demonstrated here is the value of work. So yes, my father came and worked in factories and worked in labouring jobs like many Pacific peoples of the era. And it was really important for him to pass on those values to us, to work hard, to be dedicated in what we do, and to also pass on to my children. But we know in migration to New Zealand that there's a change that happens, and there's different values that come face to face with each other. Values of collective responsibility on the one hand, and then up against these values of independence and how those play out. We, just a few weeks ago with the Dawn Raid's apology, it opened up, I think, a family and community, probably our Aotearoa New Zealand collective memory of our history. And so there were these waves of migration at that era. And so if you think back 1960s, 50s, 1970s, and now the people who came in that big wave of migration to help the New Zealand economy to grow and to prosper, they're now of senior years in this country, and some have passed away. So there is a increasing Pacifica older population in Aotearoa, New Zealand. But one of the reasons why we've come to do this study is the research is actually sparse on Pacifica elder care in the Aotearoa, New Zealand context. What has changed, and what is the impact of the changes for the health and well-being of carers, of Pacifica families, and of elders as well. So here are the aims and objectives of the study that is currently underway. It's to explore family, community and church perspectives and experiences of caring for Pacifica Matua or elders in order to improve health and well-being. So more specifically, what are the elder care practices? What do they look like in our families and communities now that contribute to our family health and well-being? What are the cultural and contextual changes and how is that impacting on our ability to provide that care, that intergenerational care? And what are the, for policy and programs, what are the social and cultural supports that are needed to sustain care of our Pacifica elders? So the study is largely qualitative, and we're employing Talanoa as well as Whaapaletui in the study. So Talanoa with other key stakeholders and groups, such as some of those listed there. Whaapaletui is about gathering knowledge from the collective houses of wisdom. So this process involves talking with elders, talking to carers, talking to young people, and then bringing that knowledge and experience from those different houses together and weaving that together. So far, the study there's been some data collection with one family by way of a pilot, and also there are two of our Samoan churches here in Auckland that have participated in the Whaapaletui, the data collection, and we're going to hear from one of those churches today. And we have coming up in Palmerston North, where I'm from, Sione and I will be working with one of the Tongan churches there, and I believe there will be also another Tongan-focused data collection here in Auckland. So yes, we originally set out with the Pacific, but given the makeup of our team, we were advised and we undertook to focus primarily on Tongan and Samoan communities for this study. Okay, so what's going to happen now is I'm going to invite Professor Fiona Alpars to come and just give a little bit more background. Professor Alpas's area of study is about healthy ageing and ageing well in Aotearoa, New Zealand. She's an international expert in this space. So she'll give a little bit more background about this research in New Zealand, and also the need for the Pacific voices to come forward in this space. And after that, we'll hear from Reverend Fotu and Selena about their experience in participating, being a part of the Talanoa, and then Associate Professor Alapaya will come up and share some of the findings. Over to you.
As you probably noticed, I'm not Pacific. So I'm going to give you a view of ageing well in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and show you how little is that from a timer. Probably not me, because saving timers or something. Anyway, I'll So, as Tracy said, I belong to the Health and Ageing Research Team based at Matua University, School of Psychology, and Sophie was kind enough to include me in this study. My life and my amazing expertise, maybe. I don't claim to have great knowledge in the area, but I want to tell you about some of the work we've been doing in our Health and Ageing Research Team. So, Christine Stevens, who's my co-leader of this team, couldn't be here today. She's recovering from a hip replacement, so she sends her apologies. Okay. So I just want to give a brief talk about population ageing and ageing well in New Zealand, and then about the informal caregiving context in Aotearoa, and then, if I've got time, some findings from the Health Work and Retirement Study, which is one of the projects we're involved in. So, as we're all acutely aware, most of the world's population is ageing, and the fact that people are living longer is obviously a really great achievement. But demographic change on such a significant scale, as we see here, has huge impacts on many aspects of our lives, including the provision of health and social services. So how are we in New Zealand and the rest of the world responding to these changes? Well, internationally, New Zealand is a signatory to the World Health Organization Global Strategy on Ageing and Health, which went from 2016 to 2020. 5-year strategy for action. As you can see, the strategic objectives on the slide, I won't go through them. But one purpose of that strategy was to build the evidence in partnership for the UN Decade of Healthy Ageing from 2021 to 2030. I think it was meant to start last year, but I think the WHO was a bit busy with something, so we're starting this year. They did launch the report at the end of last year, and we contributed some data towards that report from our team. So the WHO, when they've got time, is leading an international action to improve the lives of older people and their families and communities. And you can see there 4 actions on the slide there. So you can see that there's quite a focus on care in both the strategy and the decade on ageing. So providing informal care or formal long-term care for elders. So if we go back to New Zealand, generally we live relatively long and healthy lives, but life expectancy at birth differs markedly between ethnic groups. I want to say straight from the start, these are Stats New Zealand groupings of people, not me. So Stats New Zealand tends to take groups of people and lump them into one Pacific, so it's not me. But even though life, as you can see, life expectancy has improved over the decades, there's still gaps between groups. They have closed in recent years but still remain high. So this slide goes to 2014, I think. There is some later data, 2017 and 2019, and it shows the gaps have closed a bit, and people are actually reaching higher life expectancy at birth. So with this extended life expectancy, New Zealand population is ageing. So the number of people aged 65 plus is increasing, while the birth rate has been decreasing since the 1970s. So sometime in the next decade, there will be more people aged 65 than there are children aged 0 to 14. So the proportion of old people compared to the rest of the population is increasing. And by 2034, there will be 1.2 million people in New Zealand over the age of 65, 21% of the population, compared to about 15% at the moment. And if you look at the 85 plus group, that's going to more than double up to 2034. New Zealand is also becoming increasingly diverse. There are more than 200 ethnic groups in New Zealand. It's Stats New Zealand lumps them into 5 groups of people. So older adults in the Asian, Māori and Pacific groups will more than double in the next decade. Europeans will increase by about 46%. So this increased diversity means people who make up the older population will have very different aspirations and needs as they age, including how they want to be cared for if and when they need it in their later lives. Our population is also highly mobile, and people are having fewer children. And that's expected to result in more older people living alone in certain communities without family or whānau support. But for some groups, intergenerational households are expected to increase, and clearly at this point in our history with the terrible housing crisis, that's going to increase even more. Some older people will have increased responsibilities for both older and younger generations, so they'll be looking after grandchildren or older disabled children, while also looking after their elder parents. But there will also be other families and whānau who don't have whānau around to support them, or provide day-to-day care if they need it as they age. So how is New Zealand responding to this demographic change that is and will continue to have a major impact on our health and social services? So in 2019, the Office for Seniors launched the Better Later Life strategy, which promotes healthy ageing and improving access to care and services. And you can see in the little picture on the right the 5 themes that strategy has. And one way to achieve these aims is to enact or implement the Healthy Ageing Strategy, the New Zealand Disability Strategy, and the New Zealand Carer Strategy. New Zealand's very good at putting out lots and lots of strategies. So the Healthy Ageing Strategy takes a life course approach and seeks to maximise health and wellbeing for older people. And a current key priority is to improve support for informal carers. The Disability Strategy hopes to improve access to quality healthcare and health outcomes for people with disabilities and long-term illness. And the New Zealand Carer Strategy generally focuses on carers being supported and improving the health and wellbeing of carers. And their latest action plan from 2019 to 2023 focuses on target populations: Māori, Pacific, younger carers and older carers. So that's a specific action for the next part of the strategy for them. There are a lot more strategies that could be cited here, but I think the key focus across all of them and across all government strategies is the importance of the role of informal carers for our elders and supporting carers who provide informal care for their families. So if we look at the New Zealand informal care context, we obviously in New Zealand have policies in place or ageing in place or ageing in the right place, and they've been central to the government's response to population ageing, to reduce costs for residential care obviously. So with the greater number of people, of older people with disabilities and or high dependency remaining in their own homes, their own dwellings, there also becomes an increase in the need for family care and informal care to provide care within that family dwelling. So there are 430,000 people that provide informal care in New Zealand. This is according to the 2018 census. So this is unpaid activities looking after and helping someone who is ill or has a disability. And I'm sure it underestimates the number of people that provide that type of care. A lot of people don't call themselves carers because it's just part of being in a family. Women comprise 63% of informal carers, and they outnumber male carers in all age groups in New Zealand. The carer population is older than the New Zealand population. So 35% of these carers are aged 55 and over, and 20% of them are 65 plus, which is compared to 15% of the general population of older people. And carers span all ethnic backgrounds, again, thanks to Stats New Zealand for those categories. So given that many carers will be experiencing health issues themselves as they age, this group is of particular interest to us at our Health and Ageing Research Team, and it's of personal interest to me because I cared for my parents as they came to the end of their lives, and I also have a disabled son who lives with us. So sort of like the sandwich generation, people on their end. And a lot of people are in that situation, particularly people that have children later in life. So the value of informal care. Family care is an essential part of our healthcare system. Informal care provides many benefits for the person themselves, so it improves patient outcomes, reduces unnecessary rehospitalisations, and reduces residential care placements. There are also considerable financial benefits to society because informal care saves billions in healthcare expenditure each year, and these are just some estimates of how much informal caregiving saves the health system in these 4 different countries. These are quite dated numbers. I'm trying to update them. It's very hard to get good data. The New Zealand one, that's from 2014. It was from Auckland University. I think someone's trying to update it at the moment, but I think it'll be considerably more these days. So providing such care publicly would not be economically sustainable, obviously. So this, as a society, we do rely on the unpaid support provided by family and friends. But providing care can have a cost to the carer, not just a financial cost, but also on caregivers' health. And there's lots of research tells us that carers are more likely to suffer from adverse mental health outcomes such as depression, chronic stress and anxiety compared to non-carers. And there's also some evidence for physical effects as well of caregiving, although they generally tend to be smaller effects than psychological effects. So there's reports of poorer perceived health, older caregivers reporting more doctor's visits, and some research has even found higher mortality rates for spouses of caregivers with high levels of stress. Caregivers might also neglect their own health to provide the care for their care recipient. So they might have poor stress management, might engage in negative health behaviours like smoking or drinking or poor nutrition, less exercise, but obviously they've got less time to do all these personal management things, so that's not unexpected. And these things can all differ depending on your gender, your socio-economic status, so the outcomes will differ across populations. So how has this played out in New Zealand? Well, our team, HEART, has published a number of papers around caregiving, informal caregiving, from our samples. So just, if I've got time, I'd just like to share a few findings from our projects. Sorry that people at the back probably can't see this, but our main project is the Health, Work and Retirement Longitudinal Study of Ageing. I'm going to show you a very complex slide, but you don't have to read it all. it's just to demonstrate that the study, it's the longest running study of ageing in New Zealand, and it's been going since 2006. It's nationally representative sample, well, tries to be nationally representative sample of 55 to 70-year-olds who we recruited in 2006 and invited them to join our longitudinal study. And usually it's a biennial 2-year postal survey out to our participants, although we've had some off-cycle surveys as well. And we refresh the sample, we have for the last 4 years, so that it maintains the representativeness of New Zealand population 55 plus. But one major issue we have with our sampling frame, which is the electoral roll, is that we don't capture certain harder to reach groups like Pacific peoples. So we have very low Pacific people number in our longitudinal cohort. We oversample for Māori because we can, through the electoral roll, we can target people that tick the box saying they are of Māori descent, so we can send out more questions to that population to get better coverage. So that's one major limitation. So at the moment we have a questionnaire out in the field to our cohort that follows up on the impact of COVID-19 questions that we asked in 2020. And we'll be going out separately to collect information from Pacific elders with the marvellous help of Siatu and Talanoa. So we're hoping to make up some numbers. What did we say? 1,000. So Siatu and Talanoa are going to be very busy. And Tracy and Siatu. Sorry. So yeah, so I must acknowledge that limitation of our longitudinal study. We're trying to find ways to increase participation there. As you can see across the top, we've had multiple funders, HRC, Forced, MSI, EQC, all the acronyms, NBN, the lot. So, in our questionnaire we cover these domains as a core content every time we survey people, but today I'm just going to talk about the informal caregiving, which we ask all the time. We have published a number of papers on the impact of informal caregiving on our older New Zealanders, around the impact on health and the impact on employment, but I'm just going to touch on the health papers today. So this one is, we examined the relationships between ethnicity and gender and caregiving in the health of older New Zealanders, and this was from the first 2 waves of the study in 2006 and 2008. And this is what we were asking. Does providing higher levels of care and more care across time lead to poorer health outcomes? And do female and Māori caregivers have poorer health outcomes than male and non-Māori caregivers? As expected, women were more likely to provide care than men, and Māori were more likely to provide care than non-Māori. And this is probably partially explained by the higher morbidity among Māori, older Māori compared to non-Māori, which increases the need for the informal care from the family. And also most older Māori prefer to stay in their own homes as they age. There's very few residing in residential care, so again the need for more family care. Respondents providing higher levels of care reported poorer mental health, and this was particularly true for women. And we think maybe the availability of social resources might partially explain this. There's one review of gender differences in caregiving found that men received more informal assistance for their caregiving than women. A lot of people rally around men when they need help and bring meals and so on. You're probably aware of that. So they seem to get more informal care than the women. And another review found that caregiving placed more restrictions on social activities for women. So they were cut off more from their social networks than men were in the same position as caregivers. So we might need to look at the availability and uptake of both informal and formal support for male and female caregivers. We also found that Māori providing high levels of care reported poorer mental health, and this might be due to possibly their poorer health status to begin with, or it could be frustrations around barriers to accessing formal care. So the cost or the attitudes of the health professionals they have to deal with, or cultural barriers to finding the particular types of formal support that they want. So the Māori caregivers may not benefit from the more formal supports that are available out there, and they may be able to access them as well. Level of care was unrelated to physical health. So we didn't see changes in physical health over time on caregiver status. And that might be a function of the duration of the follow-up. There was only a 2-year follow-up. So we've published another paper looking at longer term follow-up. This is over 10 years. And there's limited research on the longitudinal effects of caregiving on health, and it's been mixed. So some studies have found effects of caregiving on health over time actually diminish if you take into account things like age and gender and people's economic status. Or they've found only short-term effects that diminish over the medium term. So we wanted to see what happens over a 10-year period. And we've also, that other studies have found that there's been a gender effect, that there are health effects for women over long term, but not for men. So the research questions we wanted to ask was, do the health trajectories over 10 years of carers and non-carers differ? And do patterns of care and transition impact on health over time? Obviously, people transition in and out of being caregivers over time, so we want to see if that made any difference. And were there any differences for males and females? So we categorised carers into 4 categories. Those people in our study who had never provided care across the 10 years, people that we considered permanent carers, who cared all across the 10 years or took up caring over the 10 years, those that stopped providing care during the 10 years, and then people that were those transitioning ones in and out of care. And so I will try and talk you through this. So what we want to know is, would there be different trajectories for health depending on which care group you were in? So looking at mental health over the 10 years, as a group, carers had poorer mental health than non-carers. If we just look at the caregiver groups, mental health remained fairly steady for all groups from 2006 to 2016, except for those who stopped caring. So those people who stopped caring some time over the 10 years, their mental health improved after they stopped caring. They started at the lowest point in 2006 and then ended with the second highest levels of mental health. Of the caregiving group's permanent carers, which is the dotted line, had very similar mental health scores to the non-carers, the dark line at the top, and their health didn't really deteriorate over time. And what we think, I think that's important because it suggests that there's what we call an adaptation hypothesis, and that people, over time, carers adapt to the challenges of caring and are better able to adjust and manage care demands. There's another theory that talks about the wear and tear hypothesis, where people, the challenges or burden of care wears them down over time, and we didn't find that. We found that people tend to adjust to the caregiving situation. There were no differences on gender. If we turn to physical health, there were no differences in 2006 in physical health between carer groups and non-carers. And physical health did decline, as you'd expect, with age. There were no significant difference in trajectories for these 4 groups, and again, no differences on gender. So this adds to the increasing longitudinal evidence for limited impact of informal care on physical health over time, and does support that adaptation hypothesis that people adapt and manage over time. They may start at a lower base rate carers, so they may have lower health to start with, which is what we call a selection bias, and that people who have poor health maybe are not in the workforce, so they have more time to provide that care in the first place. But their health doesn't deteriorate at any faster rate than non-carers. Finally, quickly, I just want to present one more study, and this was on caregivers of people with dementia. And in 2016, the estimated number of people living with dementia in New Zealand was 62,000. And that's predicted by 2050 to be around 160,000. So a huge increase. And obviously caregiving for people with dementia can be challenging, but there is also increasing interest in understanding the positive effects of caregiving on psychological well-being. So some caregivers report positive outcomes and high quality of life, even when they're spending long hours time caring for someone with severe dementia. So this study wanted to explore the different profiles of psychological functioning of caregivers of someone with with dementia. We also want to look to see if there are any protective factors that would help people in that situation. So we detected 3 different profiles. So what we're looking at here is people's scores on depression, mental health, quality of life, and life satisfaction. And we found 3 different profiles. The majority of our caregivers fell into this optimal psychological functioning group. That was 60% of our sample. So they report high levels of well-being, mental health, quality of life, life satisfaction, and low depression scores. The next profile of caregivers were the suboptimal psychological functioning group, and they had slightly increased levels of depression symptoms and lower than average mental health, quality of life, and life satisfaction. So anything below the line is below average, and anything above the line is above average. And then the third group, which was about 11%, which is still a significant number. These were people with very high levels of depression, very low levels of mental health, quality of life, and life satisfaction, so indicating very poor psychological functioning. These profiles didn't differ by gender, marital status, work status, but this third group, the poor psychological functioning group, were younger, significantly younger than the other 2 groups. So what we wanted to know was what predicted which group you ended up in. Was it to do with gender and age? Was it the caregiving characteristics, so how long you've been caring for someone, or how severe the dementia of the care recipient was? Or was it something else around the support that you get from other people? So again, another rather complex slide, I'm sorry about this, but if you just focus on the red bits, this here, LC stands for economic living standards, so people's wealth. So if you look down here at social support, this was the key finding. Personal contact, loneliness, and strong social provisions were the most important contributing factors to which psychological functioning group you ended up in. Not so much the caregiving factors at all. So you'd expect it to be factors around the caregiving situation, but it was more about the social support people receiving. Length of caregiving was the only caregiving factor that significantly predicted profile membership. Participants in the poor functioning group had less caregiving experience. You'd think people that had been doing it for longer would have higher stress levels, but it was the people that had less caregiving experience that were in the poor functioning group. And remember, they were younger as well. So adjusting to the caregiving role can be challenging, and new caregivers might take time to adapt, so they cope less effectively with the difficulties involved in looking after a person with severe dementia. So it comes back to that adaptation hypothesis, that over time people will adapt and their stress levels may actually reduce. So differences among the groups were driven mostly by social support, and that really highlights the importance of social relationships and the support received from your family, friends, networks when you're in the caregiving situation. Not so much the so-called stressful factors of being a caregiver. So, summary. We finally get there. So what can we summarise from the HWR studies? First of all, we have very few findings on Pacific caregivers. That's the main take-home message here, and that's why we need this kind of research that Sione and Tracy are doing. And I've got a little bit of skin in the game as well. So we do find some cross-sectional evidence for the relationship between mental health and caregiving, but not for physical health. And there's minimal evidence for change over time in people's health based on caregiver status, so we don't find any support for this wear and tear hypothesis that people get dragged down by their caregiving and get sicker as they provide that care. It's more about adaptation over time. People adapt to their role and learn to cope and learn to manage. We think caregiving may have a greater impact on Māori health outcomes due to existing inequalities of health and perhaps barriers to getting formal support services, and perhaps the multiple roles of older Māori that they take on in older life. We've mixed findings for gender, and I think social engagement was the most important contributing factor to psychological functioning for those dementia carers, not the caregiving factors. So access to appropriate supports is really, really important. And I think one of the big take-homes is that maybe the caregiving is stressful assumption is a bit of an oversimplification, and that the caregiving experience that takes a more balanced view, which takes into account the range of responses, potential experiences, outcomes, is what's required in our research to understand that there's varying ways people respond to the caregiving situation. So that's not to deny that there is distressing aspects of providing care, but there's marked heterogeneity or variation between people, between groups, and that's really hard to capture in survey data, so it's really important to have this qualitative work where you get those real experiences, lived experiences of people. I think those caregivers that have existing vulnerabilities or lack of resources may be most at risk of poor outcomes, so interventions to provide them with the most appropriate support for their situation is really what we need. And obviously we need more research in this space, desperately need more research in this space around Pacific elders and their caregiving situations. So thank you, and I'm sorry I didn't have anything to present around Pacific elders, but that's just demonstrating where we need the research. So thank you. Sorry it took so long.
Thank you very much, Professor Albers, and also Associate Professor Mafileo, for that very nice background that you have provided from a very international and global view about the subject matter that we're here today. And it's really, really awesome to see how you have highlighted those numbers and where our population is moving on in the next few years, and the fantastic work that you're doing with that longitudinal study from 2006 up to now. Very, very humble lady, Professor Albers. Her name is very internationally recognized. People always try to get her to be part of their team and also go and be keynote speakers in their conferences. So to have her in our team, we are very, very blessed and quite honored to have her in our team. So she'll be the one during the Talanoa to answer the difficult questions. And thank you, Tracy, for also giving that background about our Pacific study. Now I'd like to invite our good Reverend Fotu and Selina, who have they were very kind enough to have their church kick off our project, and I'll just invite them to come and share how did they find the whole process going, and then we'll give it to Selto, and then we have a little bit of video before our tea. Yeah? So.
Ya, manatu atulo watu momo iyo sange tulo lava wa tatono foyo leo sila saanga lupo tayao Ron maulu foi whangatia, wale pa ia ma le mamalu ma fia le nei tula laso. Ia whatalo whātu le mamalu no whenga luenga, Suma Reverend Doctor, Ia Sione Waka, and Pastor Sua Sangana. Ia whatalo whātu foi te mā malolo, Ia Sione malolo, Ia Tāwai, Ia mese foi Suma Ia Pastor Ron, Ia Matua, Ia Mata Mofia, ma ua maulunga foi le ne yaso. Ia whatalo whātu foi no wha professor, Sunga Ia Situ, Ia whapena foi Ia Fiona, Ia mese foi Ia Tracy, Ia male mamalu na whenga luenga, ma lolo soi fu manuia, alo foi le langa ma, Ia siri lavo leo tātou whenua I lumo lu, ai leo tua lu pe uku masani tātou tulu, Ia whatalo whātu, Ia alo ingoa, Ia o fotu, Ia ise taimi, Ia ona, whasoa tu fosha uole, Ia lena mao mai whatasi, Ia mai mo Ia o ule tai le kalesi, Ia ole pule leo matua inga, Ia family atu I la wawsina sino tātou maftanga, tino I matutua o tātou nu, ona o lea o tātou mafuta whatasi wha Pasifika, Ia ole a whaungale ngana peutania wase, whasoa atu nei e kalesia. Warm welcome and greetings to our family and friends, pastors and distinguished guests, professors, and all who are able to be here today. As I said, I'm here with my wife. I may be the lead singer of the band, but she's the band manager, so she's entertaining. She will have a talk and about our experiences with the Porkalame Leon Matua Tausi. Thank you very much to Associate Professor Siautu Alfaio for this golden opportunity that we received for our church in our Ecclesia to participate in a program that's very close to myself, close to my heart, as well as my wife. The program itself in our Ecclesia, we've been in our church just now for 5 to 6 years, and what we first noticed, the first thing we noticed in our Ecclesia, maybe 70% of our Ecclesia is over the age of 60, 70. So for myself, see, I'm just getting grey hairs now, but when we first entered, we were very black hair, young kids. So trying to explain and talk about life to the elders is a very daunting task, but they also shared and we worked together and Matua ngā lulue whatasi. Ia lea o Matua mōwhio voice and Matua maftanga I tono Ecclesia. So when Associate Professor Siautu brought this opportunity, we grabbed the opportunity with 2 hands because it's very important to us. The opportunity's been very nice, as you can see. There are some of our deacons there talking with Reverend Tamaya Alfaio. Yeah, because they are very interested itself. That is the picture of 70% of our church. A lot of them don't have a single grey black hair, and they're very old and wise people. But also the program itself was very nice. We shared over these days and it was very useful and opened up our eyes to what is very important and the assistance we can get. As my personal experience, I'll keep it short. Thank you for the presentation by Reverend, I'm sorry, Fiona Alphas. It's nice and long, so I can have my talk very short this morning. But what we do in Samoan culture, when we remember our foundations, I think it's very tawa to every Samoan person. And every Samoan language week we have, every Samoan language week we always remember, through service, the Pacific holds service very high. Anything in life we do, in the families, in our villages, and the church, service is paramount in terms of that. And I guess that is one factor Mō mātou ia whanau, when we look after our parents, there's two things, service and blessings, but we tend to forget. Me le sa no me sunga professor, we sometimes forget what Professor Fiona Alpas has presented to us, and that is the mental part and mental things that it affects our people, physical, and we also have to have a look at that side of things. But as Samoan people, we never look to that first. We look towards the tautua, whamurianga. To keep it short, my own personal story, mata mai lava I Tamā, my grandparents. The story for me starts with my grandparents. My grandfather was a whaiwhiau, Samoa, in Tautu Refanga, and when he retired, he was very sick. I think he hadn't reached 70. My father wanted to sit to the exam to Mālua to be a whaiwhiau, but there was no one to look after my grandfather. So my grandfather said to my father, look, I know you want to be a whaiwhiau, but your brothers can go and be a whaiwhiau, but you come and look after me. So when my father came to New Zealand, he was quite old in age, and my mother was also looking after my grandparents. My father so desperately wanted to marry my good-looking mother, but she said, wait. My father waited for 10 years, and when my grandparents, my mother's parents passed away, after 10 years, they got married. So they finished their tautua, but by the time they were married, they were well into their 50s, and they had me. And so I had old parents growing up, so it was natural to fall into this. I'm not the first. A lot of our young Samoan people are like that. They have very old parents, just myself and my older brother. So when my father passed away in 2010, I was inside the Polisi Whawhiwhiau in Matua. I was in my second year in theological college, and it was just my brother. The reality of here, we are not in Samoa anymore. If we are hungry, we can't go and cut the awhai. We can't go and pick up the taro anymore. If you don't work, you don't have money. It's a very different environment than we're in. But my brother had to sacrifice. He wanted to be married, had all these things he wanted to do. But just like my grandfather said to my father, my mother said, "Oh, son, just for now. Just wait for it." My mother passed away 2019, and now he is a free bird. I don't know where he is, where is Tafao and take his name. As free as they come. But he says to me every day that the tautua that he done, he has a void that cannot be filled by anything. He has filled it. There is something that I know a lot of people regret. It's something that once your parents go, nothing in life can fill the void. You can fill it with a lot of things. So that's my personal story. Yeah, I know what Pokalam is all lunch, so yeah, but we have to
my name is Selena, and as my husband mentioned earlier, we both serve at the Congregation Christian Church of Samoa in Papakura, where we are under the leadership of the Efakasa Church based in Samoa. So we are very blessed and privileged to be invited by Associate Professor Siautu, as well as her beautiful team here, to be a part of this research study based on Matua Tausi, or looking after our golden treasures, which is our elders. So for us, and just to give a little recap on our research program with Siautu as well as Utalo and the team, it was such a blessing on that day. As my husband mentioned earlier, we have a lot of elders in our congregation, those elders, we have a lot of carers, which is their children and their children's children. So that day, they all felt very special to be a part of this research. Moving forward, for them to have a hand in, or to have a voice to speak, to give their and share their stories or their experiences, and also to share with Associate Professor CO2 what they need in terms of help, and also just lack of knowledge, which was one of the key highlights that we heard on that day, was lack of knowledge. And the primary factor from that lack of knowledge was the lack of language communication from our elders. A lot of our elders, the main question they was like, oh, when is my pension going up? That's a lot of the things that they were knowing. But it was falling a lot on their children who were born and bred in New Zealand. Whereas a lot of our elders, as mentioned, they migrated here into New Zealand in the late 60s, moving forward. So their knowledge was mainly to just work hard, not ask too many questions, and whatever was told to them, they always trusted that that was the right thing to do. So a lot of the research and everything that they had brought forward was mainly around the environment that they were in with their children. Personally, for me, my mother passed away in 2009, and she was diagnosed with cancer. And when we received we received this information from the doctor, for us as children, specifically for me as a daughter, I didn't think twice. I went into my job, I told my job the situation, I asked for leave, whether it be unpaid or paid leave. My duty was to care for my mother. And I know that, we have siblings, but specifically as Pacific daughters, we felt that that was our duty. It wasn't more of a sacrifice, it was just this natural duty. Coming from a lot of our families within a church setting, a lot of our values are instilled with the word from God in the Bible. And it instructs us a lot from the scriptures, right from the 10 Commandments, to honor and obey our parents, because that is where our blessings come from. That is where we receive long life, and it tells us in the Bible. So we instill those values in us, and we don't think twice. And that is what happened to me in my experience with caring for my mother. From that experience, we were blessed to have actually be part of the palliative care under Tuatara Hospice. And from that was a whole new world to us children. We had no knowledge of medication, what it was for, morphine, how, we had no knowledge. It was such a new world to us. We also were introduced to so many different services that we had no knowledge that we could have applied for way before. But because we were at the end stage of my mum's care, we only wished that we knew earlier. And it was very pronouncing from our families that day that they had brought forward the same request, that they wished that they knew that all these services were available to them, all these financial services were available to them, because some weren't as fortunate, some like my husband, there were only 2 of them. So with only one in the family, had to leave work, had to care for their parents. The financial strain was a very big highlight within our research, within our families. Without the financial strain, they weren't able to have proper resources to care for their parents. And us children, we only want to give the best for our mum and dad. So without that knowledge, it was it did put a strain in our families. Second highlight that we heard a lot was housing. And we know that we are currently going through a housing crisis in New Zealand, finding it hard to, even own a home. And so a lot of our families are renters. They rent home, getting a Housing New Zealand home, it's not easy, and you have a long list to wait for, and so having an adequate, warm home, that was another highlight that brought forward, was a lot of reasons why our parents were not getting any better, because they weren't living in warm, healthy homes. So for this study to be led by a Pacifica, to be led by a Pacifica woman, it was very encouraging for us. We had a lot of our elders even speak of, how about we have homes specifically tailored for Samoans, run by Samoans, so that we could feel that trust and could feel comfortable, specifically tailored for Tongans, and within our Pacifica community. But, we hope that from this research, a lot of improvement will happen within the communication, within the language barriers, and specifically coming into our churches, because it's our churches we will find a lot of our vulnerable families and our families in need. And with our carers, it was really, really interesting hearing Professor Fiona's study and also what they found with our carers, because within that you will find a lot of those carers that will not let you know or advise that they are actually carers, because they feel that that is their duty and they don't consider themselves carers. Moving forward to rest homes, they don't feel that they need to move their parents into rest homes because they feel that they're not fulfilling their obligations as children. But that comes all the way down to lack of knowledge and the lack of support that is out there. Because my father now is currently under the care of Tausi's hospice, and he is currently in palliative care, and he is also, one of his diagnoses is dementia. So a lot of those challenges brought forward, specifically last year with the lockdown, it was very hard to explain to my father that New Zealand is in lockdown, because it's such a foreign thing to him. He had no idea. We were like, what's the coronavirus? He's like, what's the coronavirus? I want to go to Pack and Save. I want to do my normal duties. And he was unable to do that. And mentally, it not only affects our elders, but it also affects the children that are having to go through that process. So we pray and we hope that this research is going to hopefully bring upon good policies and create good policies for our Pacifica elders, and also our, as a nation as well. We hope that moving forward that there is a space, to have Pacifica elders, have that care, as well as our caregivers that are providing that. That's all from me. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
I don't think there's anything else I need to say. Good Reverend and Whaletua Selena said it all. Whakatei te le lava mo le nei. A so whaatalo whaatole pa ia ma le mamalu. Sui sunga whaathengai ngā lato Whaletua. Me se fo ele mamalu wa awhia le nei tula. I know that Dad's got his ukulele up now. That means that it's time for us to break for morning tea. But one of the things that we do in Talanoa Hubs is actually Talanoa. So, the other thing is to be flexible, eh? Pacifica people are excellent adaptation. Hang on. Just give me a minute. Just get through this and then ave lo lelo bese. So we're going to leave the video for morning tea. And then, but we'll have a little song, and then we'll have not just quite yet there. We'll have a Talanoa first, and then wrap up with your song, or song first and Talanoa. Oh, okay, all right. Song after I speak. I just wanted to quickly just wrap this session up for us, and just I don't think there's any more that I can say after the good Reverend and Selena has spoken about. I mean, we will be posting up some of our findings as well through our media. We're only in the midway, sort of, COVID threw us out a whole year, because as you can imagine, a lot of our churches were pretty much shut down for the whole year, and none of our elders wanted to come to church at all. So it meant that we had to delay a lot of our going out to churches till this year. But we thank the churches that have been involved with us, the good Reverend Fotu and Selena, Papakura PIC at this stage. And so we've got pretty much over about 35 families already. HRC funded us. They said, look, we started off with, I think we went upwards of 80 to 100 families. They said, not possible, oh my goodness, my English is going. They thought that was a big number. And so really their expectation of us was around 30 to 50 families. But I think as we knew churches, we knew that we'd have a lot of families that we could get in easily. And now I understand that getting the families is the easy part. It's actually what I was talking about, is analysing the data. It's getting all of the stories together and bringing all of those ideas that people had fed us back, and then being able to represent that in a research environment, which, as a lot of the professionals out here know, writing an article for us Pacifica academics, well, it's not an overnight job. That's why we have our good professors to guide us and to give us some of their resources, or to write the articles for us. And then get that out so that the policy makers can hopefully make the change. But essentially for us, today is the birthing, I think, of the first step for a series of these kinds of Talanoa hubs, because as we've noted going out to the churches, this is massive. You know, many of my generation now, the 40 plus club, we're like caring for our elders, you know, and we grew up in an environment, like Reverend Fotu said, as the children who are caring for our grandparents. So we're like those on-off carers. We're on during our young, then we go off during our teens, then we come on again as adults. So I think we need to look at our mental health, given the trajectory that Fiona was talking about. But I think that this is a massive can of worms that we're trying to open up for our community. We know that within our churches there's a lot of issues. So when we think about dementia, yes, we can pray for the cells to regenerate. We can pray the faith prayers for our parents, but at the same time, we need to understand the conversations that are happening. We also need to receive some of this information and then maybe combine it with our prayers, you know. And some of the questions that I get often are, so does that mean my faith is not enough to heal my mum or dad, you know? Or that means that I haven't prayed hard enough. So how can we reconcile these things with our families? So the struggle is real, and I'm just going to fast forward to my last slide, which is basically what we've found here in terms of just the halfway, we're just at the halfway mark, is that really our Pacific families are intergenerational, meaning we've got more than 3 generations. We can have the children, the parents, the grandparents, the great-grandparents. So that's plus how many generations in one family, one household. So when we're thinking about housing, we need to think about what Selena said, big living rooms. You see all these houses being built up left, right and centre in South Auckland, they're all going vertical. But if you look inside of them, the doorways, people have been telling us they can't even fit themselves through the doorway. So if we need like wheelchair or larger body doorways. You know, these are things that carers are actually saying to us. Build the homes, yes, but we need homes for our larger intergenerational families. And from the elders themselves, they want to live independent lives. So they're saying, maybe just have a big bathroom, you know, for me, so that I can, a bathroom where I'm cared for, and the carers know they can lift or they can shower, all those kinds of things. So for me, I think the big thing in the halfway mark is, if we're going to build forward better in a COVID environment, we need to think about our Pacifica families who are intergenerational, because the majority of them are living in those environments. And then from a needs assessor perspective, when you're engaging with the help, I don't know if our NAS team is here, from the hospital, there's that policy about able-bodied people in your home. So if you have able-bodied people in your home, then you can't access home help, which means that's all of us here. So that means that for our home, where I've got my husband and I and dad living in, well, part-time he's gone to my brother, but anyway, another story, that means that we can't get help because we're home. But just imagine we've got grandchildren, you know, who are at school, or they're at high school or colleges, universities, that means that that family will just have to keep on struggling with the care that they've got at home. So Midway Point, we're looking at these kinds of things that we want to raise up and make a point to from our research together with the churches around these issues. So we're not the answer at all. That's why we're running these forums called Talanoa Hubs, which is Humans United Beyond Borders Symposiums, because we believe that our united voice will be able to bring about change. So we are recording with our youthful, awesome team called Talo and Matt, because again, we believe that if we record your voices, that's more powerful than just our articles and our voice alone. So I think that's it from me. I'll hand it over to our team. I think they want to sing a song and then we'll have the Talanoa. Or you want to sing your song now? Now's the time.
I find strength in singing my song. See, I came in a banana boat, 26th of May, 1965. And the banana boat left out in Fiji with my friends. A lot of them are now passed on. And the plane took us from there to Phenopai, because memory was not existing those days. And I start my journey. But I find strength, because, I am the, what do you call, I find strength in my mother was a widow. When my father passed away, she was a widow. Every time we have a devotion, she sings the song that I'm going to sing. She always cried, but she finds strength. Thank you very much for the awesome singing, Reverend. And you're right, singing sort of connect us with our ancestors and our spiritual world, and it strengthens us through our times of need. So thank you for blessing us with that treasure. We'll continue to our next session, and I'd like to invite our speakers before to please come to the front, and then we'll have our Talanoa session, eh? I'll just introduce you and then I'll hide it up. Okay. You guys are ready. And I think this opportunity here is just for us, just to have a Talanoa, and for you to have comment, questions, or anything that you want to know much more about the study. So maybe I'll open up the floor for someone who's very kind enough to please start. Yeah.
I have a question. Question is, with all the figures all the figures that you gave us from the government, my question comes from something that I'm not sure whether you remember Reverend Tausi Tia. And Reverend Tausi Tia earlier said to me, Ron, why don't we buy this old people's residential home for our Pacific people? And this was in the late 90s. And I said to him, are you serious? He said, yeah, because I can see in the future we're going to need places for our people, our elderly people. And I said to him, right, I'm behind you, but you take it to the PIC, fraternal. And he took it there and it died. And I was really disappointed. But my question is, are there any figures as to people, the elderly people who are still attending church? Because it's possible that a ministry can come out of this to care for and make available buildings for retired people. At the moment there's no such retired place as far as I know, whether for Māori or Pacific. And Leao's idea was you have these one big whale, so families could come in, and then you had the smaller whales only where they could sleep. But there was a main whale and then a big kitchen area, and I thought, that's a great idea. You know, it's like a camp. So, according to your figures or researchers, do you know of any that can help us in case there's ministries that can come out of that for churches?
Short answer, no. There are different housing models that are coming forward now, and I think the housing crisis is giving that a bit of momentum around co-housing. They tend to be hippie, kind of have a history of sort of being based around sort of alternative lifestyle, but they're becoming much more mainstream. And certainly I know in Wellington, and there's a couple in Auckland, where co-housing and exactly the kind of model you're talking about, where there's a lot of community shared facilities, there's intergenerational, so it's not just for older people, so you can have families and young people living in mixed type of housing density as well, so there might be 1-bedroom places for a young couple, then there'll be a 4-bedroom place for intergenerational large families. So those are certainly on the horizon, but there's no government funding towards it as far as I can see at the moment, although I think some of the Housing New Zealand projects that are coming up are trying to do that mixed housing model as well. But yeah, it's certainly something that we're doing some work around housing, and that's some of the ideas that are coming up. People want different alternatives as they age. And I take up the what you were saying, Siaka, about accessible housing. I just can't believe that Housing New Zealand, with all their new houses, have you stolen from Housing New Zealand? Only 15% of them have to be accessible. And you know, 24% of people in New Zealand live with a disability. So why aren't we building all houses accessible? Because then people can age in those houses. Wall exercises and wheelchair users and so on. So yeah, there's a lot of work to be done.
Just to add on, Ron, that's definitely what's come out of the churches right now. The churches have been, I know for Zelina Fortle's church and even the other church, the people have been saying like perhaps something like how our Mata started, but do something that's for elders. So maybe start off with not like an elderly daycare, it's the wrong, but like an elder group, but actually look at like the churches, because the church complexes are quite huge. So there's lots of churches with lots of land, but it's always just a Sunday use. But maybe rethinking how those complexes can be used for for things like a co-housing. So it could be like I think the Housing New Zealand name is Kaingaora. It could be a church and Kaingaora partnership, whereby the churches are funded through Kaingaora to maybe develop those kinds of, at the moment there is no Māori or Pacific care home, and yet what we've found too in talking to the churches is that all the money, like it's actually a money making, so you know how they've got the business models for all of the preschools that people are going to, it's the same for elderly care. So there's a lot of money being made in care homes because they will rather finance that than the care at home. And so that's the reason why we need this type of qualitative research, so that we can actually say that, but the majority of us are living at home.
Let me just add, I can't recall the name of the researchers, but a few years back there was some research done with the Tokelau community to inform a housing design. And they came up, you know, as like an action research. They started off with culturally what would a space here in New Zealand, a housing space look like, and then that community informed, and they came up with this model of a home, with working with designers and architects. And I thought that was a really great study. But it's like, how do you join that up with Kaingaora, with business development, so that whole idea of culturally informed housing design, or spaces like elder care spaces. Maybe that's the next project, Sil.
What's the name of
What the professor said. But I agree with the using of facilities that the churches have to facilitate a program that's useful for our senior citizens.
Was there hand at the back? Oh, was there young? Oh, no, okay.
Thanks for the opportunity. I would like to add this to Ronald Lauese, Reverend Ronald. The idea that we're one of the Reverends Tausi in Avondale. This is something I'm so happy I'm here today. This is something that I have proposed to Hawkins, one of the mayor in Manreo 4 years ago. I have a sister who she lives in America, and she came along to New Zealand to visit our mother, but she passed away as well. And she's the one, she was doing something similar like this in her area in America, in USA. And she came along and she said to me, "Sister, there's something I want to do in New Zealand before she returned back to the United States." And I said to her, "Okay, say it, whatever you want to say." And she said, "I have no money, but when I look at our mother died just about 100 years old. And she looked at how healthy and how active, and they have good characters. They're very strong Pacific Island older people. Not only my mother, but there was something that Reverend Tawai had done the scheme in the PIC church in Papakura years ago. So I was so happy what my sister was saying. She said, 2 things she was wanting to do. To help the Pacific Island children, because they mix with all the other bad ones on the street. And also, there was something happened in Manukau said in that time when she was living there. There were wars in there, police everywhere on the street. And I witnessed that because I went and saw it my own self. And plus the other thing was the elders. And she said to me, I'm going to talk to Afa and I. That's the time when those guys were Philip Taito, and all those member of parliaments at that time. And I said to okay, straight now. What do you want to do? The children or the elders? And she said, I think that I leave the children after, but talked about the elders. Because respect is the word that Pacific Island people always number one to anybody. And I said, okay, so how are we going to do this? And she said, okay, I called a meeting. So we have about 6 meetings in Manukau in her house, which is the house in New Zealand where she lives. And I said to her, how are you going to call everybody come here and let them, your house is so small, not enough room. And she said, it's not the matter of the room. It's a matter wherever they stand like palangi, like a cocktail. When they go there, you stand between the room anyway. So anyway, we done that. She went, we did all the business plan by the help of all this MP and also Hawkins, the mayor that time, George Hawkins and all that. There were lots of other professional people. And then we provide the business plan for that. And I said, so where is the place? Where's the area where we're going to start it? And she said, don't worry about it. You pray and I pray. Honestly, that's a powerful thing. We can get there. So the last meeting, that was heaps of people from South Auckland were there for that. And what the answer was coming? They said, all the house in New Zealand, they were there at that place called Ratabai, right on the top of there in Manukau. And they were going to build something like a Vodafone building there. And the answer was coming back to her and said, all this house in New Zealand, they're going to plan whether they're going to remove the people away and start something like that, or. So what happened was so beautiful. And I said, she is right, let's pray. And that's a powerful thing where it comes to the Pacific Island people. That is the technology, is the prayer. So strong for that. With everybody, they have faith to do and build that. Because we've been told, no way the government won't fund that. They're funding the other side, what they see, but they don't have idea what is more important, because everybody, now even if you look at Jacinta and all the government, they're young and they don't realize the time when they retire, they will be like everybody else, you know, the elder age. So what happened? We waited, and the time when something happened to my sister, somebody murdered her because of a jealousy and all that, what she was planning to do that. And what happened? We called and all those guys came back, professional one, and they said, the government, they granted. But the sad thing was only herself, she signed of everything without any of us were supporting that. So that's why I'm so happy to hear talking about the elders. And now I heard that you guys said that the government, they don't want to know that. But that's my story. But we pray and you do something. Or CEO is our ministry officer. Surely you can do that sometime.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for the sharing and the power of prayers, and sorry to hear about your sister and things. And I'm sure these research will continue to provide evidence and things as well, and help to provide changes for our people in the future. Yeah, Follow, you got the mic. I'm sure there's our time is a bit. The thing is, so we got Follow and then someone at the back, and then maybe. Oh, sorry, wrong place. Yeah.
Sorry, I was given the mic, so if somebody else wants it, then I'm happy to.
No, you go.
She called you my name.
No, yeah, sorry.
I'm thinking I'm not following, but that's okay. The Pacific, I'll take it.
Sorry about that. My glasses, something wrong with it.
That's okay. Palawhalai atu, my name is Joyce Ntovihi. I'm here today in representation of being on the board here at Tōtara Hospice. So I'm pleased to be here. What I'd like to perhaps contribute to this is, I know we often work with churches, and Selena, you said earlier on in your kōrero, there are a lot of services out there that we don't know of. My request to the research team would be perhaps casting your net out wider to include us as social services to be part of this study. You know, we have I'm from the whono as well. We have the whono, we have whono-ola, we have Tō Pasifika. There's a whole lot of Pasifika providers that are out there that will perhaps strengthen this movement in terms of our age area. So my request for perhaps, we do often work with churches, you know, and there's no disrespect to that. But if we don't know within our church groups what services that are out there for all our families, how can we be part of this journey? Because, you know, it takes a village to raise a child. We hear that all the time. But it also takes a village to work together. And so if we're part of the village that we're trying to build in terms of social services, please include us in the research. You know, wouldn't it be wonderful to have a group or an area that has services, work and income for Pacifica, by Pacifica, healthcare for Pacifica, by Pacifica. We do have a lot of intergenerational movement moving forward, and there's a lot of young people who are coming out of universities with all these brains and all these wonderful models and ideas. How can we tap into that as well to utilise so that we can get ahead? We need to pave the way for our parents, you know, our younger generations for the future. And, you know, we're sitting here and I would really like that my child, who's 20 now, could sit here and say, we were part of that movement. We made a change. Nothing got lost in Pacifica, and Māori are out there. So that is my request, obviously, to include the services that are out there within the area. So, yeah. Kia munuera tātou going.
Thank you for the opportunity to Talanoa. My question is, you know, it's really awesome to know that you Talanoing with our elderly. So I wanted to see what your, I guess the question is, how open are they to talk about what they want towards the end of life here? How does that come easily, or have they been had the opportunity to talk about that? On how, I'm just coming from the perspective of being a nurse in the hospital and seeing some of our elderly coming through the invasive care that we had to give them, because there hasn't been any discussion before that, what they want before they pass. So, yeah.
At this stage, the end of life hasn't been a discussion for them. It's really more around caring, but roundabout ways of discussing it have been mentioned, like really more like training, especially from the younger generation. So when we were out in the churches, we broke them up into youth, carers and elders. And a lot of the younger people were raising training, so training around caring, but you could sort of pick up some unspoken issues around like things like lifting. So you could sort of hear that beyond the physical wear and tear, for want of a better word, there were probably a whole raft of social emotional issues as well that we hadn't even really touched on at that stage. But we've still got a couple more churches in the Tongan space to do that, so we might take that into consideration for the Talanoa with those families. And we do actually have Toa Pacific on board with us in the elder care space. Malia Hamani has been advising us, so she has the more hard to reach families. So we might pick up, and we have her on board more for the family harm, because we know that issues around caring can also result in a lot of family harm cases. So yeah, thank you for that.
Thank you.
My name is Mele and I'm from Tonga. and I did worked in aged care for a long, long time. And don't get me wrong, I grew up in a family who were missionaries in the Solomon in Papua New Guinea. Come home with malaria, and we live and praise the Bible every day. And often I question the role of church in caring for the community. The thing is, we donate a lot of money to the work of the church. And I wonder, you know, I love the church, the model that has been bring up today. But I often find that our youngsters and the elderlies are being neglected by the service of the church. For some reasons, I really grew up in church, and my families, my father was a minister, my families were missionaries. But I went to the doctor one day, and the doctor said to me, "What are you going to do about your blood pressure?" And I said, "I have faith." And the doctor said to me, "Did you read the story of the man that went on the chariot with his horse and fell into a mud full of mud? And he sits there and pray and pray. And God was angry and said, 'Get off the horse and drag the chariot out of the mud.'" And I think, Professor, your voice is so quiet for Pacific Island people. They're loud and they need to hear. And I think we have been here for a long, long time. And I could understand someone is saying we should build a center for Pacific Island. And I was looking at the money that the church are donating every year. We should put that money, instead of building church, there are too many churches. We should build a house for our families to come together and have our own respect and have our own way of being and looking after our own people. We should have our own. We have put money into so many things, but I think we should look after our backyard and look after our people. And sometimes when I was working in aged care, I go and visit people. And what happened, the younger people looking after their older people, they use their money, to be honest. The other thing is, they're committed to the work in church. They go to the choir, they go to other meetings. The parents are left at home with no morning tea, no lunch, no afternoon tea, until the whānau come back from work or what other commitment they've got. And I often think of unemployment youngsters that we could take them to the church and teach them how to look after their older people. We could employ them. We should run an agency. Younger people should be trained to look after their older people. I'm speaking because well, people, we die young. We all die of heart attack, as you can see. But I think working in aged care, we need people. We need to train our younger people. They come out of university with a big certificate, big degree, and big ideas. But older people don't need much. They need love. And they need our being there with them. They need people. And I think that's where we need those research and those study to cry out loud that we need people that are going to work there and respect our old people. And I think that's all I can say,
Thank you very much for that comment, and you have raised some really, really important points there around the church. Maybe we should close down all the Tongan churches. And I think this kind of forum will be really, really good to have those Tongan ministers, or I mean some of that there are some churches who are doing great work, but I know what you're talking about as well, right?
Thank you very much for your comment. You know, the lady, and just say thank you because we have a church. It's empty from Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. We only use 1 hour on Sunday. We have a church. There are many of our people in our church at all. Thank you for that. After that, I heard the new adaptable, is that right? Why can't we come and use that church to adapt to the needs of the community? Sunday, they come to church, but they leave their church because it's empty now, literally empty. So when I hear the word adaptable, can you come up with how can we?
That's something that you guys will have to say.
I'm pretty cautious of time as well, and I know our Talanoa is getting to that mawhana, that warmth and stuff as well. I'll encourage you to continue the Talanoa through our morning tea and also throughout the day, because I don't want to cut into the time of the next session. So we'll have a bit of a break, and I'd like to thank our panel, our speakers for this morning for their great speeches and sharing their story, but we'll have a bit of a break for morning tea. So what I'll do, I'll bless the food and then we'll have a bit of our break, eh? Iglerei maada wha maronga whai ka whiona ko ia go I kuna I ko hawa ko ia po para ma ko ia mawai. Amara ke te mau whahi marolo mauloto atu ngā ko mea toko ni ko ia ko teu ta pa ki ai moa ia mo ki nau tona nau teu ia ka mau ia wha maroha mau sino ko ia ngai whatongia o hanga mai nei mua. Ko re kātou ngai meani was Christ ko waka ma wha maui. Amen. Amen. Now,